I'm Juniper Owens, Director of the Academy of Integrative Mental Health, and one of the hosts and creators of our podcast, Integrative Conversations. And as part of our February Rewriting Relationships podcast series, I wanted to share with you our conversation with Kristal DeSantis with Austin Strong Relationship Building Center in Austin, Texas.
My name is Kristal DeSantis, and I am a Texas licensed marriage and family therapist. I office in Austin, Texas, and my passion population is hypermasculine men and the people who love them. So that's where I developed the Strong model of relationships, and it is a 6-step kind of overview of what I've come to know I've found in all healthy relationships. So these are 6 elements that I've found in healthy relationships, and I'm really passionate about working with anyone who wants to have healthier relationships in their lives, whether it's with themselves, whether it's with their loved ones, whether it's looking for a romantic partner or strengthening their own current romantic partnership. That's really where my passion and my work lies. So I'm a marriage and family therapist, and that's why I became a therapist in the first place, is because I really wanted to understand relationships. I grew up in Japan, so I grew up in a different culture. So when I moved to the US, I was, just kind of like an outside observer of trying to understand, right, how do people do these things? I was in college and I was like, how do you date? Where do you even start with all of this? So I just really ended up being kind of an observer of relationships. And then, eventually I ended up in therapy with a marriage and family therapist and decided, oh, I want to do that. So when I got your email about rewriting relationships, that's something that I've been, kind of from the very beginning of my therapeutic career, is really trying to understand what are the foundations of relationships and how are they different now than they were, 20, 30, 40 years ago. And they're profoundly different, right?
Yeah, I'm very curious about your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So, one of the things, so also personally, just my passion population, when of course I've been interested in relationships, but just personally, I always have wanted to work with veterans and first responders. That's kind of my passion population. I love that population. And what I started to notice as I was working in couple settings was that there was just a really large discrepancy between the way that these men were raised to be and what then was expected of them in a modern relationship. And there's just such a huge gap. And I felt like, man, we have had the feminist revolution for a couple of decades now. And, women have been consistently getting the message that, you can be however you want to be, like the world is your oyster, empowered, empowered, empowered. And I really started to notice, like, I think men kind of got lost in that conversation. And then maybe the response to that was this kind of rise of toxic masculinity and men's rights activists, which, is a little bit not exactly what I was seeing as helpful in relationships, right? Because then it became a power struggle between, especially when I worked with heterosexual couples, it just became a power struggle, right? So this guy is hearing like, no, being a masculine man and going back to kind of the, when things were good, when men were men, that's how you should be. And feminism has ruined relationships. Then you have women that are saying like, no, we actually feel really empowered. And now we want to, have a different type of relationship. And so I was just starting to see a lot of power struggles in my couples, especially around this kind of, how do we navigate the modern relationship? So.
Yeah. And it sounds like what I'm hearing is that relationships really fascinate you, but also like, I think relationships are a key component to human life and living. So it makes sense that they are like kind of a central focus of most of our experience in a lot of ways.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so it sounds like your observations of relationships started from just your own curiosity of like, okay, what is this? And then is now a part of your professional career. And yeah, I'm just curious, like getting started, what would you say was maybe not the most, but an insight that you had that surprised you about relationships when you first started noticing them or focusing on it?
Honestly, I think what surprised me the most was that there is no manual.
Why?
I mean, it sounds so, I don't know, maybe that sounds strange, but I came here from a different culture, right? And so in observing kind of the explicit and implicit rules of relationships in this culture, I was like, well, who do you learn this from? And especially romantic relationships, right? I was like, well, how do you learn the rules? How do you know, and of course it was just like, well, there are none. You just kind of figure it out, or, break up a couple of times and figure out what you like. And I was like, that seems terrible. Like, that seems very inefficient. It seems painful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I feel like there should be a better way, or I would love there to be a better way. Right.
Yeah, I like that perspective. And, as you're sharing that, it definitely seems kind of mysterious, even though there's all these implied rules and norms and
Mhm.
ideas around it, but there's still a mystery because each relationship is so different, right? And the relationships with ourselves, oh my, a whole nother topic. But yeah, so what feels important for you to share about what work you do or what you are noticing around relationships now and how they've changed? You mentioned earlier that you've noticed they've changed, and I'm really wondering
Mhm.
about that.
Yeah. So, one of the things that I developed right away as I started working with couples is, let me see if I can boil down what makes a relationship healthy into kind of the simplest possible formula that I can find, right? So I'm like trying to create a manual here. What are the steps? What are the basic elements of a healthy relationship? Um, Regardless of gender roles, regardless of sexual orientation, regardless of who's the working parent, do you want children, do you not? Let's just fundamentally, what makes a healthy relationship? And so that's where I developed the strong model, where I kind of boil down what I noticed, that if these things are if these 6 elements are present in a relationship, the tendency for it to be healthy is just much higher. And again, I'm not saying like this, you know, super, this is it, or nothing. But again, that's just kind of when these things are not present, there's a lot of conflict, there's a lot of trust issues, there's a lot of things that put couples into distress, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. And I kind of like that because it almost reminds me of the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse with Gottman's work, where they focus on the like what's happening. But you're kind of saying if these elements aren't present, but it seems more strength based, that the elements aren't necessarily like stonewalling negative versus like I don't know if I'm explaining that correctly, but that's
Yeah,
what came to my mind.
absolutely. And that's what I was, because I was also Gottman trained when I first became a therapist. And so again, kind of looking at, what are the red flags, right? And so for my approach, I was like, well, what are the green lights? Like, where
Love
are the
it.
green flags? Like, what do you look for, right? Especially when you're trying to find a new person or you're trying to start a new relationship, you don't want to wait until, okay, now we have criticism, now we have stonewalling, right? Um, where are the green lights? What do you look for in a healthy partner or in a safe person to be in a relationship with? Um, so that's really why I developed this. And then also, again, working with my passion population, working with men, especially men that tend to be in more kind of hyper masculine type professions. Really, again, what I noticed about that population is they can be very highly motivated and really passionate about learning skills. And so that's also why I wanted to focus on the strengths rather than things to avoid. Is here's what you look for, and then let's build from there. Yeah.
Yeah, I very much appreciate what to see versus what not to see, or like you said, like, yeah, if you wait for the red flag, who knows, people could be on there, like that you might not notice that, or what are we striving for in a relationship? And it sounds like you have found some patterns or some themes that in your work and in your life you've noticed. So can I ask this, and this is a question that comes up a lot: what is a healthy relationship in your mind?
In my mind, a healthy relationship is a strong relationship. And so STRONG is my acronym. Again, I wanted to choose an acronym that felt powerful. One of the things, again, working with men, is a lot of therapy tends to feel a little, and again, this is just perspective that I've heard, sometimes men that enter therapy feel like it's very feminine, and it's very geared towards the feminine perspective. And sometimes I notice that men, when they go into couples therapy particularly, they're kind of brought in by their partner, and they feel kind of already ganged up on, like already I'm being told that I've got the 4 horsemen, and I don't know what to do about that. So with this acronym of STRONG, I kind of identified that there are 6 elements, again, that are present in a healthy relationship. And I can divide them into kind of the survival phase of beginning a new relationship, and then the thriving phase of an existing relationship, what keeps it healthy. So the first STR is safety, trust, and respect. So these are the fundamental kind of foundational elements that create a healthy relationship. And then once you've got those, then to keep it healthy is openness, nurturing, and generosity. And so it kind of fit into this little acronym STRONG. And yeah, so that's the model. That's my philosophy right there.
Oh my, I love it. And you're like an artist with words and that, like that. Not only do you have an acronym, which we know in the mental health profession, we love our acronyms,
we sure
but
do.
also it fits in the stages of a relationship. And it makes sense because, like, to me, safety, that's the first, that when that like lights up in my mind. Like if you think of the primary attachment, or like our very first relationship, safety is like the thing. And so I love that that's first. And it just sounds like it flows. Yeah, you're a true artist with that.
Thank you. And that is something else as well, is that I've I came into the field really wanting to work with that population, so I ended up getting trauma trained. I am EMDR trained, and so that trauma informed of, before safety, we don't have anything. You cannot build, and a lot of, again, couples therapy models, and not to knock anybody, because I'm really kind of building on the existing research out there, building on the existing models, but so many couples come into therapy working on trust issues, right? There's been broken trust, or how do I learn to trust a new partner? I'm trying to date again. I have commitment issues, trust issues. And often when I go back to, well, why would you try to trust somebody that you don't feel safe with? Things just shift, And again, integrating that somatic approach of what does it even mean to feel safe in your body? Can you recognize when you're getting activated? And of course, Gottman does this work around like diffuse physiological arousal and in watching couples have conflict. And so just changing it to a language that we all know, which is, does it feel safe? And if your fights don't feel safe, then no wonder we're having trouble building trust, right?
Yeah, so starting in that foundation. Because oftentimes, and when I used to work with couples, like I noticed that we would want to like fast forward to like conflict resolution and help how to have the fight and different things. But yet that hadn't been established yet. So of course nothing was going to happen with the communication. So yeah, I love that. And then it gives you something to strive for when we get to the fun part at the end. Yeah. Well, it all sounds fun, but that sounds like, so yeah, can you give some examples of how this model has played out in your work or your life in general?
Yeah. So one of the things that I think I really like about the way that this works for me is it can also work with individual work, right? So I do individual therapy as well, and working with people just so they can identify, what do I need to feel safe in a relationship? Do I feel safe expressing my emotions just with my friends? Are there certain emotions that I don't feel safe expressing because of my own, ideas about masculinity or my resistance to vulnerability? Are there emotions that I've been shamed for having, right? And so emotional safety is part of that. And then, also one of the other things in that I think is, well, for me, it was profound, but I found some research from an anthropologist, and he talked about the 3 Ps of masculinity. I don't know if you've heard this, this one. Um, so that, men really find their identity in a lot of different cultures. They kind of boil down to 3 things: the protector, the provider, and the procreator. And if any of these things are threatened, sometimes it can, leave a man feeling a little bit out to sea as far as, well, then what is my purpose here? And so that is something, in working with the strong model. So the safety, I kind of break it down also into relational safety of, who are you in this relationship? Are you a person or are you a function? Right? Is this relationship based on function? Are you 2 people together because you're fulfilling some kind of function, and you are, you're showing up as the protector, and you're showing up as the, nurturer, or you're showing up as the provider, and you're showing up as the, whatever. And, or is this relationship based on connection? Is the relationship safety around something that would transcend your roles? If that makes sense.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah, I love that. It's really weaving in and I love that you mentioned individual work, because part of this conversation we've been having on rewriting relationships, and it really came up around, so we were looking at the theme of what comes up for a lot of mental health professionals around Valentine's Day, because that's in February, and we know holidays can bring up a lot for our clients. And so what was really coming up, and we heard so many different things, so that's where this rewriting came out, because viewing yourself, like relationship with the self, isn't necessarily brought up when we speak of relationships, right? And so you mentioned that, like, in all those parts within ourselves and safety, that's a relationship, right? To get to know it. And like, I love that you noticed that. And then bringing it out too, to, what are the biological or internal drivers? And then what is societal and cultural expectations, and how do those threaten safety in multiple relationships?
Absolutely.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
And in the rewriting piece, I'm curious, one of the questions that came up that people were wanting to know about was, so what happens if you're not in a relationship, or how do you define yourself outside of romantic relationships? And like, I don't know if that's come up for you in your work, but that a lot of the therapists had talked about their clients really struggling with not being in a relationship as part of this conversation. And I don't know if you've worked with that or if you have thoughts on it, but I'm curious because that question did come up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think kind of, exactly what you said of going back to, function versus connection, or the performance versus personhood, right? Are you looking for a relationship so that you can perform a function? Is it like you feel like you're supposed to be in a relationship at this age? Or is it truly about, I really crave connection. But in order to have that genuine connection, you do have to be fully inhabited in your own personhood, right? And so when I do individual work with people, and I always say, like, function-based relationships are very valid. Those are what make the world go round, right? We show up to our jobs and we have relationships with people, with our coworkers, because we have a shared function, right? There are lots of times where we have relationships that, we're showing up as our function, right? They're performance-based. But when the function ends, the relationship ends. And so just, really checking in with yourself as an individual, and, do you feel fully connected to your personhood? And if you were to show up on your next date as that person, how would that be different than maybe the way that you've shown up in dates, in the past?
I love that. I really like you said personhood and function.
Yeah. So when I talk to couples, I talk about the two types of relationship based. So the relationships that are based on function and relationships that are based on connection. And then
Yeah.
when I talk,
Function
and then,
versus connect and connection. Got it.
yeah. And then when I talk about kind of the individual work, it's the performance versus personhood, right? Are you showing up as a performance, looking for a function based relationship, or are you showing up with your personhood looking for a connection based relationship?
Wow. What have your clients noticed with that? Because that sounds like really helpful to start to distinguish, and that you're not putting any of those down necessarily or saying that that's, but just to distinguish between that, because my guess is the needs are different in those types of
Absolutely.
relationships. And if you're, what have you noticed? I bet that's like so
Yes.
helpful and
Yeah,
healing.
it's awesome because, when you can kind of again say that, it's totally up to you how you want to show up and what you're looking for. But then it also helps you decide very quickly whether or not the person that you're talking to is on the same page. Because I see that in couples work all the time, where one person is really looking for a personhood connection. They want the emotional connection. They want to be validated for who they are, and the other person is kind of checked out. They're not connected to their personhood. They're very performance oriented, and they show up kind of functionally. They say, well, I've washed the dishes and I've paid the bills, and I'm not sure what else you're asking for. Leave me alone. Or the people that they've raised children together, and then the children have left home, and now they really don't know. Did we just function? Were we just two people that had a co-parenting business together, and now what do we have? Do we even know who we are as people anymore? Right? Are we connected to our personhood? And if we start to date again, do we actually know if we like this person that we've spent the last 30 years with? you know
Oh yeah, definitely have heard those, all the above of what you said. Oh, I've seen those themes.
Yeah. So,
Especially the theme of, I love this function piece. I've really not heard it described that way, and I'm resonating with that because, like you said, the person's like, but what are you talking about? I did the garbage and the thing, and they really feel like I'm like,
mhm,
that's showing love. And I've heard the thing of love language, but this seems to fit differently than that. A
mhm,
little bit more. It makes more to me, more sense.
absolutely. And one of my favorite, I use the love languages, and so one of the ways that I do a exercise with couples in session is give your partner some validation using their love language, but then notice, are you validating them for their function or their performance? If so, can you use that as a trailhead and walk it down to find their personhood? Right? So again, it's a useful place to start, right? Oh, thank you for taking out the trash. Okay, now follow that trail. What does that say about them as a person? Why do you love that? Why is that a way that you're expressing your love? Or are you simply validating them for their function, as in your boss would tell you, hey, buddy, good job, right?
Yes, yes. Yeah, it just really adds depth to
Mm-hmm.
getting at the heart of the needs that are the needs that are craving to be met, and then also where people are coming from. Because I think that I've noticed in work with couples, and I've even done, I'm noticing, like you talked about the evolution of relationship work, and like a lot of people will come as friends, or a sibling unit, or a throuple, or all
Mm-hmm.
kinds of different formations of relationship, but it all seems to boil down to similar parts, and like the needs that aren't being met and the
Mm-hmm.
personhood. I love that you put a word to that. So yeah, I think it just really, to me, what I'm hearing is that we're adding some depth and process here to get to kind of more of the heart of the matter rather than stay in the peripheral.
Absolutely. And that's something too, just again, I've noticed about working with men is often they are validated for their performance and their function. Even if their partner is thinking that they're validating their personhood, often they don't get those kinds of compliments, right? They get the compliments of thanks for taking out the trash, thanks for, putting the kids to bed, thanks for washing the dishes. And instead it's well, tell me what that says about your partner. And some of these, especially again, like working with men, some of them have never heard in years that that tells me that you are a kind person, that makes me feel cared for, that helps me feel safe when you stay up late and lock all the doors at night. You know, that shows me that you are a caring and nurturing person. And again, those words, just going back to, making sure that men are also being included in how to show up in a modern relationship, right? So again, I think sometimes what I've found is that women have been getting a lot of resources around that, like, asking for what you need, asking for, setting your own boundaries, and, just being empowered in a relationship, which is awesome. But then being able to turn that on the other side and say, okay, well, now, what is he getting? And sir, are you able to articulate what your boundaries are and articulate, how you would like to be seen? And just making sure that, an equal relationship has equal access to resources on both sides, right?
Yeah. And do you find that that's difficult for the men that you work with to, I don't know if difficult is the right word, but have you found that like once those questions are asked and maybe haven't been or even considered, is it difficult to get to? Or what have you noticed with that?
What I've noticed is men have been wanting people to ask them those questions for a long time, you know? And I think that's, again, where sometimes the validation of quote unquote, manliness and masculinity as like, oh, he doesn't need compliments, or, oh, no, he already knows, or, oh, he gets embarrassed when we, say these kinds of things. And it's like, well, what, like, can we try it, Um, and I've seen it really, really shift things. I've seen it completely open up people. I've worked with teenagers who have brought their dads in, that they have this image of their dad as like this, very harsh, very, controlling, or, old and, stuck in his ways, and simply saying, can you share a little bit about, maybe where that behavior came from? Or can you share a little bit about, what does it mean to be the protector in your family? And are you open to hearing how your family would like to be protected, rather than simply using kind of what you learned from your parents, or from your dad, or from your, upbringing as a masculine man? And, one of the, again, this is just, I love this population. And one of the experiences I had was this man who was, he was trying everything that he knew. Like he got a big dog, he got guns, he got the door locks, he had a security system, state of the art. He was, highly trained in all, martial arts. And he was like really wanting to protect his family. And just having that conversation of, I honor that. I honor that in you. But are you open to hearing what would actually make your wife feel safe? And his wife saying, what would help me feel safe with you is for you to learn to express your needs differently, right? That would help me feel safer and more connected to you than all of these things that are kind of performative protection, which again, they're very valid. They can be really important. But when it comes down to what does it mean to feel safe in a relationship? And then again, being able to start that conversation and then switching it around too, for you, sir, what would you need to feel safe in this relationship, right? And that's something else too, is that, in this work with the strong model, because it's not, specific to romantic relationships, it's not specific to heterosexual, married relationships or anything like that. I also, talk to men about male friendships, a lot of the men I work with, especially kind of the veteran population, is they really miss having their tribe, right? But then once the external environment of, being deployed or being an active military member, how do you then maintain your relationships, right? And like, let's say, I mean, there's lots of research on this, but a majority of men now have, I think there was a recent study that said, they don't even have one friend they can call if they were in the hospital, or if, their female partner's friends become their friends. But if there's a divorce, if there's separation, they lose that entire social network. And so, really encouraging men, like, look, what does it mean to have some safe connections? What do you need to build trust with another man, right? What does it mean, to have a respectful, boundaried friendship with somebody? And then how can you challenge yourself to be open into maybe being friends with men that you might not otherwise think you have much in common with? And how can you nurture each other's, ways of being in the world, each other's passions, without it turning into, you know, some type of relationship where you feel like you have to be more like them, if that makes sense. Yes, there are lots of amazing resources, for veterans. There's veteran support groups. First responders sometimes have, local communities, or, there are national online groups that support men. But I just think in some ways it's definitely not as widespread or as even encouraged.
Anything you want to direct listeners to if they're interested?
Yeah, if you're interested, my website is austinstrongbc.com, and that stands for, the name of my practice is Austin Strong Relationship Building Center. So austinstrongbc.com, and you can go on there and you can see an overview of my strong model. Feel free to reach out to me. And then also I'm on Instagram at ATX Therapist. Call to action, I guess, would be, if you have any men in your life, just check in with them, see how they're doing, genuinely ask them if there's anything that they want to talk about or they want to share with you, or if there's a personal highlight that they have that they're really proud of. That's something that I've heard feedback from men is they don't often get asked that. They get told what other people are proud of about them, or they get told, like, here's where we validate you. And so just checking in and saying, is there anything that has made you proud of yourself that you would like to share with me? I'd love to be able to celebrate you in the way that you would like to be celebrated within yourself. So.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you.
It's a pleasure. All right.